Welcome. This is Leading with Spirit, the show that gives you an in-depth look at topics like what it takes to navigate your spiritual journey, how to heal yourself and grow your spiritual gifts, and balanced practices to expand your business and your spiritual leadership. I'm your host, Spirit Bird, shamanic teacher, healer, and author, here to guide you on your journey to becoming your most potent spiritual leader. Hello, welcome back to Leading with Spirit. I'm your host, Spirit Bird, and today I have Josh Meeder with me again, who is also my partner.
I was going to laugh if you said special guest, because I can't be a special guest because we live here.
So welcome, Josh.
It's good to be here.
So we have part 2 of our series together. Today we're going to continue talking about creating within a partnership, and specifically around our work with plant medicine.
Yeah.
So welcome.
It's good to be back.
Mm-hmm. Where to begin?
Yeah, I guess we could start how we came into the work, or how we start. I will say this is the first time I've spoken on camera or publicly about it. It's something that has deeply and profoundly impacted my life. And
Working with plant medicine.
Working with plant medicine. So I am excited to share it. Is vulnerable to be putting it out there. But yeah, so I guess I'll start with my introduction, and then you can go into yours. As I mentioned in the last episode, I came into it through some grief. I lost a partner unexpectedly. And to that point, I had no interest in plant medicine, psychedelics, really any real substances of any kind. Like many, I experimented once in college, and it was not a good experience. And I said, not for me. I did not see the value in it. But through that process of loss and grief, I had already somewhat unintentionally created a community of support around me. And I had a lot of people in the wellness and, healing arts around me, and didn't know that I would need to call them in. And when that situation arose, they were there for me. And there was my first experience with plant medicine was shortly after the death of my partner. And I went down and I was invited in. I had seen plant medicine do wonders for others, but I just knew it wasn't for me, or it wasn't the time. The fortunate thing is, as I mentioned, the healers that surrounded me, I had an implicit trust with. So I just knew that it would be a time, and the time was right, and I was invited down. And I can go into that story in a little while, but it was profound, and it was changed the absolute trajectory of my life in that one moment. So that was, about 7 years ago when I first became aware and involved with it. Mm-hmm. And what was your introduction?
So I've shared a little bit about this, but I'll share again. So I kind of had this like two paths that were constantly weaving back and forth together within spiritual work. As a young person, well, I guess I'll get into this too, but as a young person, the veil for me to the unseen realms in the spiritual world has always been really thin and stayed that way even into my adulthood. And so that was disorienting to some respect. And that's also what propelled me into the healing work, because I started to be introduced to a language to articulate what was happening for me outside of mental health, and that there was some problem with my chemistry. And so that started me on the path with shamanism. I'd done a lot of work prior to that with East Asian philosophy and Buddhism and meditation. I found shamanism, and then that was one of the legs of my healing path and spiritual work. And through that path, I had learned a lot of tools and experiences for helping you grow and work through your pain and transform, that didn't include plant medicine or psychedelics, that that had support of plants, but didn't include any outside influences to alter your mind, that you could access these states naturally. And then at the same time, I also came into them really through also experimenting as a young person. Although I did write an essay in high school about the value of the psychedelic experience before I'd actually had them.
Of course you did. Yeah.
And so similarly, I had experimented, I had good experiences, and then stopped for a while. And then later on, when I lived in Georgia, I found myself, I think probably with the introduction of the shamanic work and starting to understand that and journey work, found myself solo journeying in an intentional way with mushrooms, where I would go in my room and have like a whole process that I would do, and they would teach me things. So I started to develop that relationship with the plants and understand a different way to use them. But that was long before I realized that you could do that in groups, and like I didn't really know what I was doing. And then I had an experience where I was out somewhere in public. The person I was with offered me some. I knew it was a bad idea, but I took them anyway. And then I had a horrible experience. So I went through a long period where I put them down entirely, and also kind of went to this other extreme where I was like very, not anti, but I was like, you can access the healing and transformation and these like states of consciousness. A lot of people get into psychedelics because they want to have really magical experiences and they want to talk with spirit guides and talk with ancestors, and that's beautiful and true. And also I'm like, you don't need psychedelics to do that. So there was a period where I was very rigid and like, I almost saw it as like cheating kind of. And then I had some years back, I guess that was probably like 2016. I all of a sudden was called to ayahuasca, and I was like, oh, I am suddenly interested in working with this plant. I'd known other people that had. I really wasn't interested because I had seen a lot of people have not great experiences after working with it, going somewhere and not being held through the process, and definitely not being held afterwards. People that were skilled in navigating this space, still had trouble with it. But it was on my radar, and I don't know why, but I was very clear for myself that I wanted to work with somebody in the US. And so kind of similarly, I just sort of held space for that. I didn't actively go searching for something, but I kind of called that intention. I was like, oh, this plant is calling to me. I'm interested in whatever is there for me. And that's really what started, what brought me to you. It's really what started my work in the way that I'm working with plant medicine now.
Yeah. And mine was a lot slower, more gentle introduction. So I didn't have that training. I was aware, but I was also kind of type A. I was driven. Like I did yoga. I knew breath work. I knew some of the healing modalities, but that wasn't in my nature, nor was it in my worldview. And being taken down by grief and just needing something, really needed a lifeline. And I was grateful to have it. And my experience was a different trajectory. My first experience, one, I was uncomfortable. It was a strange and foreign experience. I was not comfortable with plant medicines or psychedelics. I wasn't comfortable sharing feelings publicly in a group. And I didn't want to bring this black cloud of heavy, heavy grief into a group of strangers. It was terrifying to me. But fortunately, I trusted, and I knew the group and the facilitators putting it on. So I had some trust in them that was enough to get me to the doorstep. There was a magic moment. The first walking into this situation, there was a lovely young lady, and I was just a mess, and I didn't even know. And I ended up talking to her, and in that moment, it was someone who had a similar experience, and it was just like there was this sense of ease, and that opened it up. And my first experience was actually on a very mild plant medicine. It's actually a low-growing succulent, and it was a heart opener. And at that point, I never knew what it was to be in my heart. And so for me, it was a massive awakening with a small dose of medicine to get me to somewhere that I hadn't been able to access to that point. And one of the things I loved about it was the clarity and the presence it brought. So it stopped all the mind chatter, it let me feel. And the things that I learned were beautiful. It was, I would survive grief, and it was here for me. I could forgive myself for a mistake, and there was one other small, gentle one. And after ingesting medicine, and there was time to go deeper, they asked me if I wanted to, and I stood up and I said, no, I've got a baseline. I can feel my heart. I've never been here. And that was literally a massive experience with only a small amount of medicine, and it opened me up. And from that point on, I continued to work. I probably did a little too much in the beginning. But
Do you mean too
too
frequently?
frequently. Yeah, too frequently. I would go probably once a month when it was held, and in retrospect, it is too much, too often. But I also needed a lot of work, and I dove into it. I was not afraid to do the self work with it. So I grew to know what the value of it was, and I was grateful for the container and the facilitators that I had come to know, that I had a safe space to go to, and did that for a couple of years. And I think when it's appropriate, kind of talk about like it's really interesting to see the stages of someone who, if you're coming into the work, there's definitely a trajectory. You tend to see people in year 1 and 2, year 3 and 4, year in 5 and beyond. And one of the things that I found interesting with it is when you experience plant medicine and you have these amazing spiritual openings and heart openings and just wow, like you haven't been introduced to that. There's a tendency in that first year or two is to rush in and like, this is the greatest thing. It should be available to everyone. And there's this overwhelming exuberance, and you got to love that. Um, but there's also a place where it's the introduction. And I feel the real work really begins in year 2 or 3 when you get past that and you can start peeling back the layers and working on the deeper stuff and the understanding. But to go back and circle back to what you said is the important thing is this is one doorway to the experience, to the thing. And there are so many other modalities out there that can get you in the same: sound healing, breath work, name all of them, meditation, yoga, being in nature, whatever your flow state is, you can get to it. But this is really helpful to introduce someone who might not have the training or the tools, or it does show that it's available. And that's what I really loved about the experience, and what ultimately set us on the path to be here today.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll say on that, I want to be clear, there are lots of different
Mhm.
ways of accessing the doorways that plant medicine can open for you. And I say that with also a lot of reverence for the plant medicines as teachers and guides. I mean, they truly are intelligence, that the way that they can show you things, it's brilliant and it's beautiful. So, you know, I kind of shared that piece around having the rigidity, partially because I am still passionate about that. There's a way that, especially in the US, whatever's the next big fad, people kind of go to. And, I think for a lot of people that have worked in this realm, we have a fear that it's going to get into the wrong hands or be mishandled or, not be used in a good way. And I think there's also a place where we also just have to trust that the plants know what they're doing in this field. But so I just want to name that there's a lot of reference, and also it's still important to me that we understand that it's not the only way, and I recommend, if you're working in this field, that you do it in a balanced way. So it's like you were saying, having the like going every month, and I see that a lot, especially in the beginning. It's so new and exciting, and it's like anything that really excites you initially in that stage. Even if you've like are become a born again Christian, you're so you've had this big transformational experience, and you want everybody to be able to have the same experience, and you want to get back there as much as you can. And when we just kind of keep going back and doing the same thing and don't balance it with like other processes that maybe don't include the plants,
Right.
then you can get a little lopsided and start to like lose the connection with, I don't want to say connection with reality, but you can sort of become a little untethered in a way that might not actually be helpful for people's healing.
Right. Well, what I see, and the example that was given to me is like, if you participate too frequently, what it is it's like film being exposed too quickly. So it could be double exposure. So you actually lose the clarity of the lesson because there's a time of integration with this. When you have a massive opening, wherever it comes from, there is a time of integrating it, pulling it into your being, pulling it into your DNA, so you can literally embody it and move it forward. And if you're in healing or deep grief or whatever it is, and you keep going back too quickly, I don't think there's that time to settle to integrate it into your life. So that, and also having the other modalities there, whether it be talk therapy, whether it be communication at home and supportive partnership, whatever it may be, is to have those um, other tools at your disposal so you can really, really take those lessons. Um, the, the beauty of the plant medicine is it does open doors, but the real work is still done by yourself. Like, it's not going to give you the answers. It's going to ask you questions. It might reveal something, but you have to be reverent for what it is, and I will take a little aside on that. it did actually change my relationship with plant medicines. Like cannabis is medically legal in a lot of states, and before, and like get a little recreation here and there, but now it's more of an intentional, and like you just have a different relationship with plant medicines as you dive in, where they need to be done with intention. They're not party or recreational. I mean, that's not something that's in my view.
Mhm.
Now it's like they're great healing medicines. Really, the importance is checking in with yourself, knowing, is this right? Is this the right time? Is this the right situation? And are these the right people to hold and support me through this? Um, I don't know if we want to talk a little bit about it, but what we're talking about is facilitated plant medicine ceremonies. And you started off with self journeys, and after a couple of years, I was able to do them. But I don't know if I'd recommend that starting out. That's really something you need to learn to navigate. And if you're looking at getting into plant medicine, you need to know, you need to know what questions to ask and like where to
Mhm.
go. One of the things, you spoke of ayahuasca, and I've experienced that. And my first experience was, we won't say really that great. I call it elegantly beautiful, but it literally broke down every decision, every thought I had, showed me why it was wrong. And it was really, really, it was brutal. It took me apart. But there was a place where that's what I needed, and I had good facilitation there. I had people to support me, and I could throw my hand up and say, I don't know what's happening. I don't know what I need, but I need something. And those people helped me navigate. And what was, as I described, kind of elegantly brutal, was actually really beautiful. And it was stuff that I had to dig through and uncover. And that was my first experience. And other ones have been delightful and all the things. And that was really, out of many years, like really the hardest one. And it's not, so I don't want to scare with that, but that was my experience. And again, to go back, it was because of the facilitation and the group was there. What often I find surprising is, as this is becoming more popular, you hear all these people like, I want to go into the jungles, I'm going down to there. And I love the authenticity and the depth of the tradition, but there's a place where, what are you comfortable with? Is your safety there? And also, what is your experience? So there's a lot of questions to ask, and you just really have to trust in your knowing. Also, probably not bad to talk around and ask with other leaders or other participants on their experience, so you can ask and call in the experience that is going to be most supportive for your needs.
And something we've talked about a little bit is so I guess maybe shifting slightly into where we are and navigating this space as facilitating plant medicine ceremonies for other people, and what that looks like for us, and what we're building, and what we think works well, and also how to balance like working through the place of like, this is our knowing of how we want to run it,
Hmm.
and how we think it can be the most supportive for the participants, and balancing that with honestly consumerism and like the quick fix people want, and what makes it easy for people to access it, or what they might think is best and maybe isn't always best. There's like that balance of, on the one hand, people know what they need and they're going to go for the experience that's right for them. And there's also a place where it's like, as a professional, you have a seeing and a knowing that is more informed. So, we've talked about that before.
Right.
Even just with medicines, I really believe that, when there's information or teaching that is needed from a particular plant medicine source, it tends to call you in. So you'll have like a sudden interest in wanting to try certain ones. And it's a tricky place to navigate also, because it can be a genuine invitation from that medicine, but it can also just be a curiosity that you have from consumerism.
Hmm.
And not to really make it wrong, but you need to be clear about that for yourself, which it is. And there's also a place with plant medicine and their popularity and consumerism where there's almost like this weird hierarchy that's developing, where it's like, oh, you start out with these plants, and then you go to the mushrooms, and then you go to the ayahuasca, and then you go to the toad, and like then you go to the iboga, and like they're like better than the other ones, and it's just not true.
Yeah.
And in that way, I think that there's a place where, if you're new to the inner work and you're new to psychedelics, I wouldn't recommend starting with certain plants.
Yeah.
I would recommend starting with other ones, because I think that would be the best part of the process. And so where we're sort of creating is inviting people in, whether they've worked with it or not, in a way where there's sort of a plan for like a longer term interaction with the plants, rather than you go to the jungle one time for an experience and then
Right.
you're on your own after that.
Yeah, I think, and really where, you've been to multiple containers, or basically people, if you're not familiar with containers, the group of people that come together and the people that lead it in the set and setting that it's in. So we've been to many different containers, and the beautiful thing is we get lessons from each, and there's some that have done some really amazing things, and then there's some like, I wouldn't maybe do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I know my process was like, I fell into that first and second year desire, like, yes, I want to do this. I want to become a facilitator. I want to do all this. And I'm glad I didn't. One, it wasn't it was definitely not the right time. And it wasn't also the right situation for me at that point. So it's literally taken me 6, 7 years, and I feel at the right place to do it. So I like the patience, and because year 1 and 2, it's the exuberance. 2 years 2 and 3, you're really uncovering some deeper work and doing the inner work. And speaking of inner work, before you come into plant medicine, having tools and practices of doing inner work, whether it be through traditional shamanism or whatever other field of study, is so important. You will be so much further ahead. But it's been years, and we've seen different containers. So one of the things that is important to us is a sense of community in coming in, instead of just flying into somewhere, going to a big room, getting handed some plant medicine, having an experience, and then going away. Like that doesn't seem to work for us. It doesn't make sense. Where part of the experience is, okay, is there a place of coming in with a little bit of grace where you can make connections with the other folks in that scenario, if you choose to. Also, one of the big things is the comfort of the ceremony during the ceremony. Is the space set up intentionally? Is it comfortable? Are people supported emotionally, spiritually, physically? Are they well fed? And what is the process and the return home, or the integration process? It's not just sitting in a circle the day after and saying, this is what I felt, this is what I had, boom, go back to real life. There needs to be some sort of thought and support system for you to step back into the real world and to really integrate that, where you do get the deep benefits and the deep sense of change.
Mm-hmm. This isn't scripted, so I'll just kind of off of my mind. I'm seeing how bringing what we're building together and what we're seeing is needed in this space is very similar to the experience that I had of like initially bringing my spiritual business forward and navigating some of those places again of value and consumerism and what's the right way to do it, but also you still want it to be accessible and all these different pieces. Yeah. And I think that's a space that we're kind of in right now. We have a pretty clear seeing, we have a pretty good sense of the number of people we want to serve. Not that there's a right or wrong for the number. We just know what's
for us. It's comfortable to be a small group where it can be a little bit more integrated, a little bit more hands-on. One of the things that we talked about in our group is the medicines brought in and what that is. So there's a whole plethora of medicines out there, and a lot of containers serve different things. So we know very specifically what works for us and what is within what we want to do. Part of the thing is small groups and people who have either had some experience in the work of plant medicine, or have done some self-improvement work, or have a baseline of having an intentional practice and truly wanting to make changes. Mm-hmm. So those are real important to us. The other thing that we're playing with that I really have enjoyed is, what is the experience? How can we come together? One of the things is there a place where we can sit around a table, maybe the night before, where you can break bread, where you can have the sense of community, and it doesn't have to be forced. It doesn't have, you may not feel connected, but we want to have that opportunity instead of just dropping into a space, having an experience and going, and then following it up with a thread that's woven and a support structure after that.
And I'll name a little side note on that, because I've started to notice that and see that in communities, especially as people start to journey more frequently with like similar groups. And in some ways, you're going to develop absolutely gorgeous lifelong relationships with people in the group. And in other ways, I've seen this like pocket where it builds this sort of like fakeness where you come in and you're under some, you're working with the medicines. And so maybe you have some barriers in you that are dissolved or whatever. And you interact with somebody that's not actually authentic. You're not like going into the deep spaces with the medicine, and you're sort of just being fake and being like kind of up here and in the happy and in the joy and the connecting. And then you leave that container, and there's this like falseness that's created between you and the person that's there. That's like, it's like being at a party, kind of. Not that not
Right.
that it's a party, but it's like when you're at and have an experience that's like sort of up like that and can be up like that, then when you then interact with somebody else after that, and it's not in that same way, there's just this like pocket of inauthenticity. There's like this
Because
pocket where there wasn't actually a connection, but you think there was. So there's, so this is where I find I'm passionate about wanting people to come together outside of just working with the plants and just the beauty and the joy and the exuberance of like during and immediately after, because and this is one of the things about plants is that they bring people together, and
Mhm.
obviously the plants have their own intelligence, but also people are medicine, and that's part of the way the plants work is they bring people together for those exchanges. And what I like about what we're talking about is keeping this sort of intimate circle so we can actually make those connections and find those deep places for why the medicine brought us together. And versus, again, not that it's all bad or wrong, but versus larger groups that can tend to stay sort of like up and not like into the more challenging
Yeah.
work for what you're there for.
Because and I wouldn't call it being fake. It's almost an insincerity.
Mm-hmm.
More so, it's not putting it on like maliciously. It's just that you aren't really in the depth of the experience to truly connect, or not in the intention or presence of doing that. So the connection does not mean everyone has to be in a kumbaya, everything's beautiful, but where where I sense that people need and really thrive is to actually have an honest exchange.
Yes.
Um, so if you're going to be in that space of love, be in it and hold it. The other aspect is on the other side of that coin where someone can trigger the hell out of you. Like, and I've been in there, and you know what? Those are the best lessons. Those are your best teachers. It's hard because why are you being triggered? So and to take that forward is like, okay, I am triggered, and learning how to find your voice and to do it without aggression, if you will, or to have someone help you learn how to express your voice or how to be heard. Like, I see that you've done this. I just want you to know I felt this.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have to be any more than that. But the ability to be in a place where people have given each other permission to actually express their true feelings, so it doesn't have to be all fake and love and polished, but it can have some really, really raw moments of like, I'm really not happy, or this really hurt me, or this really angered me. And to look back and say, okay, I did this, I felt this way, and actually create a dialogue, because you may have someone that you may not click with, but the ability to have a dialogue in a respectful way because you're both in that agreement is really, truly helpful.
So I'm curious. I have a few questions. Um, and where do I want to go next? I am curious about how your process of when you realized you were ready to facilitate.
Mhm. It would probably be a few years ago. So I had attended a lot of different containers. I had some home groups that I frequented, and then I was able to bring it into my community for a couple of years. And at that point, I did have some access to some mushrooms and some chocolates, and I would do a few small intimate groups with people that I knew and trusted, and mostly friends. But it was always set as intentional. It was never a recreation. It was never a party. It was, hey, let's get together. And we followed, if you will, the protocols or the habits of the thing, coming together, sharing your intentions, being in agreement of the container and what the rules and expectations are, to have the experience, to come back and to have an integration. So I did that, on my own with friends for a little while, and I sensed how natural it was, how good I was at it, and also there's still the reverence for the responsibility of it. I'm like, I want to move this forward, but there's a place where for me it was actually clear, like I want to do this in partnership, like because there's an aspect of balance, masculine, feminine. There's an aspect of support, and it was just so I knew that was coming, and it was really coming together with you. You've actually been more encouraging of me than I was in saying, I see you, I'm ready. So that was really the largest push. And being years into it, like I also felt comfortable. One of the things is when we did our first one was how we entered it with the question. We didn't go in with the ego. It's like, okay, the plants have given us the okay. We've been in communication. I feel right. And I'm going to be very reverent and say, am I ready? It was not like, I'm ready, let's do this. It was more of a stepping into it.
Asking for, seeking the agreement.
Yep.
The invitation from the plants.
Mm-hmm.
And, for me, I'm in a deep study of partnership right now, not just with you, but also with the medicines and life. And so I'm watching that, kind of similar to the way we've been creating with the autonomy, at that place of, okay, what is it that I want? Like, what is my vision for myself and my life, and what I'm wanting to bring through this work? And the autonomy of the intelligence of the medicines and what they're also asking me, and where is that place in the middle where we meet and can actually create something better together than we would independently.
Mm-hmm.
And also where there's not this like push-pull, or this place where one is trying to control the other or make it about them. Or on one side, I mean, you see that with a lot of practitioners. And I think, honestly, I think there's one of the things that I saw in my spiritual business that I had to navigate, that I also see in this work, is a tendency for people that are very confident and probably not actually ready to be proper facilitators are usually out there promoting themselves more than, and I see a lot of really good facilitators that maybe aren't even doing it yet and should be doing it, but because of the reverence and because of the experience they have, they tend to hold back because they want to make sure they're doing things right. So you see both sides, and what can happen to anybody in the process is, of course, getting caught up in confusing what you do with what the plants do. And you see this in some of the containers, which is why you need to be aware of who you're going to work with, that you have some people that just serve a shit ton of medicine and give you this mind-blowing experience because it makes them feel powerful, and it's not actually helping you. And again, on the flip side, you have this other place where instead of thinking of your work with the plants as like a marriage, you end up thinking of it as like the plants just tell you what to do. And that's not, I'm not in agreement with that.
They might give you some stern suggestions here and there, but it is the agreement. Mm-hmm. And that's the biggest thing with anyone looking to participate, really, is just to do, I don't want to say the research, but have the discussion with the people that you want to work with. You need to vibe with the people putting on the event. And more so than anything, I look at it like the plants are probably 20% of the experience. Your intention and clarity is probably 60% of it, and the other 20% is just the facilitation in the group. But really the balance comes to the facilitator and your intentions. Because you can have the best facilitator with the right medicine, and if your intentions aren't clear or you're not in the right headspace, it's probably not the time. You may not have the experience you want. But it's really, if any one of those three are out of balance, then it might be a little bit bumpy. But do talk to the people. You'll know if it feels right. And don't be afraid to ask questions. That's the biggest thing. One of the things in the containers that we've been in and we continue to promote and evangelize is a yes is as good as a no. Everything is permission-based in checking in. That the ultimate, one of the ultimate principles within the container is the safety for all, emotionally, physically, spiritually, that no one is there to do harm. So if you don't get a good vibe, keep looking. If you got a great vibe, then investigate it further. But you have the right to ask questions, and you have a right to be heard in that process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and before you actually go to ceremony, I mean, talking to the facilitator, I mean, in my opinion, if you don't have access to have at least a short conversation with the facilitator, I wouldn't recommend you go.
Mm-mm.
And I also wouldn't bring somebody into our container that I haven't had a conversation with first either. It's just not in alignment with what we're doing here.
Yeah.
Um, and and so if you're seeking it, I mean, not to make this about what to do if you're wanting to work with plant medicine, but since we're on it, if you're seeking it, I encourage you to have that conversation. And it's okay to ask somebody about their training. You should ask them about their training. And I'm even just thinking, for me, one of the places where this work has been really powerful, mentioned, oftentimes it opens up the spirit world for people. It opens up your vulnerability and heart space where a lot of people don't go, or, what I'm continuing to learn how to do. But for me, with a lot of the plant medicines, people are seeking that spiritual experience. And so part of the process is really surrendering and maybe even sometimes letting yourself leave your body. But for me, that's where I lived all the time. So actually coming and working with the plants for me has been about getting in my body and being part of this world, and being oriented in the 3D and not doing the thing where I surrender. And that's a place where if you're not with a good facilitator who can see like where you are on your curriculum and where you're needing to go, they might send you in a direction that's not really in your highest good.
Yeah. So without getting in, because there's a lot of different modalities, but there are a variety of plant medicines out there too, is to also ask about what the medicine is and the intention. There are ones that can take you into the spirit and the possibility. There are ones that can bring you back to your heart to sense the openness and love. There's ones that can be in your body to have that sense of knowing. There's one for mind. So there's all different plant medicines out there, and they can do different things. So just ask. That's why in sharing your intentions and knowing them clearly and being able to communicate them will help inform the facilitator to provide the best experience for you. And it's really, that's on you. It's your responsibility coming into this work is to know your intention or be able to ask the questions to get to a clear intention. And I mean, that's really, I think, one of the big things is the self-responsibility within this process. There's the responsibility of those that put it on, and there's the responsibility on how you show up. And in the exchange between those is really where all the healing happens.
So what do you think about, well, actually, I have a different anecdote that I want to share. And then maybe I'll ask you the question. This is more of a personal anecdote because, we shared on the last episode some of our partnership and coming together. And for me, stepping into this work, calling in spiritual partnership, also included being able to do this work with somebody. And on a personal note, for me, it was less about because of what we could do together, and more for me, just on a completely selfish level, working in a space like plant medicine and in some of these like magical unseen realms isn't always accessible to people. And it's also where I shine, where my brilliance comes out the most, I think. So for me, what I really wanted in a partnership was somebody that could actually see me in that role. It was like, that was something that I was missing before. It'd be like if you were a singer and you were dating somebody who was deaf. It doesn't mean that it's wrong, but it's like, God, you want to be able to hear them to hear you sing. And I know that you don't understand me often, or like how it is that what I'm doing, but I can tell that you see it and you value it. And I felt the same way. It's like, one of the first times we sat with medicine, just you and I saw this part of you emerge that humbled me as far as my experience and work with these medicines. I knew you'd been working with it. I knew you were good at it, but I was like, oh shit, like almost, it was very humbling to see the lives of experience that you have like in your body with this work, even though it might not be a lot from this particular life, And also during the process of building our home, can I share this?
Sure. I don't know what part that is, but go ahead.
Here we go. Another part of our partnership, as I shared, has been for me, about actually receiving support, and not having to do everything and do all of the building. And that's very uncomfortable for me because, well, what it brings up for me is that I'm like being lazy, or I'm not contributing, or I'm just expecting things to get handed to me. And then meanwhile, I think you're like not also, expecting just to hand things to me, but you do want to literally support and
Hmm.
help build the foundation, help create the safety, and kind of that platform. So while we were building the house, there was an invitation for me over the course of a good month there, um, to be working with the plants pretty heavily and a lot more than I typically do. In fact, I kind of busted through some barriers that I had, that I was like, oh no, you don't work with plants that much. But it was like, also, this is work. This is work. So there was a period there where, basically you were working your ass off building the house, and like I was out in the woods journeying a bunch.
Yep. Worked fine.
And I'm like, oh my God, this is so uncomfortable to watch you be doing like 14-hour days, and I'm like in the apartment doing drugs. And of course, that's not what it was, but I also, in that moment, so beautiful on both sides for me to be able to like see, like, holy shit, like all of these things that you're doing for me, and for us, and for what we're calling in and creating,
Hmm.
and like to actually like receive it. And I still fight it a little bit, but just let that be
Yeah.
okay. And also to have you be able to see me, like you didn't just think that I was like running away
Hmm.
doing drugs. You could see that I was checking out the territory that we were going to be going, where I
Yeah.
was going to help take us.
No, I saw your intention, and when we worked together, I saw. Well, you said I don't understand it all the time, but I can see it. Like watching you facilitate, like work and flow in and out. That's actually brag a little bit. Is like when we came together. That's what was so amazing, is how there wasn't a need for words. There was just an understanding and a seeing, and like it still amazes me, like how in ceremony you'll just pop up and be somewhere else at exactly the right time with exactly the right wisdom and medicine, and it's just fascinating and inspirational to see, and then to know that we are able to plug that in without thought, without practice. With it was just a true flow state, and we were really good. Um, what I'd also like to share is the humbling story of one of the first ones we put together, um, because this is funny. So one of the things is to be open to the curiosity and to stay humble. And one of our first experiences, it had been years. Like I'd been calling this in. I'd be like, I've got the partner. She's amazing. We're doing plant medicine. Like we're doing what I've been dreaming of. And the place we were at had a sewer backup, hour into it. So, and I'm quite familiar with plumbing issues and flooding from living in a low-lying area for years. So it was just, you could be mad, right? Or to me, the lesson was in humility, and it was funny. I'm like, okay, scoop some buckets of pea water and dump it and keep going. And it was beautiful because we did it so seamlessly. We could laugh about it. Everything was taken care of. And it didn't have to be this big thing. It was like there was the reality of being on Earth with literally the crap we have to deal with, and how to react to it, and like just knowing like it's going to be okay. It's kind of funny, and it worked out great, and like not what I was expecting for my first
Yep.
journey that I've been calling in for
Yep.
years and years and years.
I mean, you gotta appreciate the sense of humor.
Right? Yep.
Yeah, I
The
mean, and
universe laughs.
yeah, there's also that spot where, again, sometimes when you first get into the work, it's it's such a big experience, and it's so shiny
Hmm.
that a lot of people quickly decide that they want to facilitate this for others, which is great. I mean, obviously, that's part of what's happening right now. Is it's the plants are trying to move around and help us make these shifts, and also that sometimes can lead to people making that decision too quickly. But point is like in our eyes, sometimes we have this like shiny version of the facilitator, the shaman, and the your reverence for them and how like cool it looks. But actually, a lot of times you're just like literally carrying around sewage
Everything in
and
between.
dealing with bodily fluids
Yeah.
and making sure things are safe. You
Yeah.
know, so yeah. So my question was really around, what do you see what do you see about what we're creating that's unique? What are some specifics around what you have experienced that you want to do that's different? I know we talk about this all the time, and also,
Right.
where are you at with that? What is
I
you
think one
seeing?
of the things that has been reflected to us, where we have done it, maybe a little difference, is the balance between masculine and feminine. Like the example of how we bring our medicine is different, whether it be whether the sense of grandmother, grandfather, masculine, feminine. There's an energetic, I think, that play very well together, um, and I think that's a good reflection for others. The other place that I really see that that we do, or that I really value, is the sense of bringing people together in comfort and safety. Like, safety to me has always been paramount in the container: physical, spiritual, sexual, energetic, all of it. Not that a lot of containers aren't extremely safe, but there are places where it can get a little loose. And to have smaller groups, that's one of the reasons why we tend to smaller groups. There can be a little bit more hands-on if needed. The other thing is the difference between hands-on and invitation. I've seen, like, a lot of containers, especially the younger ones, of wanting to go in and do the work with people or for people. Like, oh yeah, I see this. Do you see this? Do you? And kind of trying to lead that horse to water, where I think a more open, welcoming container is allowing people to go there and maybe asking for prompts or wait for the invitation, instead of trying to drag someone to the answers, to really allowing them to find their way, and then just being aware if it spins off a little bit, you can gently bring it back in. So I think those are the differences. So what would you see? What's your thoughts on
Yeah.
that?
Well, I think to piggyback on that a little bit, and there's the balance where also been in containers where it's really loose and there's no, like, very minimal involvement, from facilitators, and as a participant, I want it. Like, part of the reason I'm at ceremonies is also for that specific facilitator and the medicine that that person has, not the medicine that they're serving.
Hmm.
And so there are times, and of course I can ask, but there are times that I like a little bit more hands-on, and I think that's just a balance of not trying to, like, force somebody into some big seeing that you have for them, so because then it becomes about you, but also not being so hands-off and just letting things happen, still getting in there and helping the people, because that's part of the agreement,
Hmm.
that why they came there.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a balance, and I think that we hold that pretty well. And also, it's helpful to have another practitioner you're working with, so I mean, usually we don't really have that conversation, but if I needed to, I could be like, what do you think about this? And I think another place where we're playing that we're, again, not totally all the way solid on, but a lot of groups are either leave the country and you go somewhere for like a week, and maybe there's like a lot of medicine, or if you're here in the States, it might be like a quick weekend.
Hmm.
And so that's where we're navigating that balance again of consumerism with, like, what's actually in the highest good. And so for us, that literally looks like we might not actually do medicine the first night. We might all come together and actually have a meal, or maybe spend the day and have a meal earlier in the day and do some workshops before we jump into medicine. And then working with the medicines that are in alignment with the purpose of that ceremony. Another place that we play is like, what is the purpose of this ceremony versus, like, we're doing a ceremony, who wants to come? And it's
Right.
like, this one is, you can still come with what you want and what you want to work on, but also this is like a general theme that we have for the ceremony, and we're going to be teaching on that theme. You can still process wherever you are. You don't have to, like, negate what you're feeling. So I think that's a little, I've seen it both ways.
Right.
That's where we like to play. And I think that's part of the partnership with the plants too. They come in and they're like, this is the thing. And then we have an exchange between you and me, and we have an exchange with the medicine where we, like, get clear on that. And also we're playing around with, having an extra day afterwards. So there's a deep integration. So there's not just this, like, everybody talks for 5 minutes and then you go home.
Yeah, rushing out to catch the airplane.
And then you're trying to get back home to go to work on Monday. And I know it's challenging because I do understand that it's hard for people to get away for that long. And it's like an extra day off work. It becomes more expensive, but it's also like, this is where I think we're kind of pushing some of new edges of like, but this is important.
You've already made the investment of time and money and travel, and like we don't allow ourselves to receive enough. And like this is important. This is sacred and deep work. It's life-saving work in a lot of
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
So to encourage people to look at it differently and providing that gentle exit.
Mm-hmm. And also, we do some group integration after the ceremony too. That's just included,
Mm-hmm.
and playing around with maybe doing even more with that. Again, with most containers that I'm in, there might be a check-in after or not. There's an encouragement to make sure you take care of your integration, but it's not actually included. And we were just talking about that earlier, where it's like it's a tricky place because it's like you start adding on all these things, and it does make it more of an investment on the participants' part. But also for me, I know it's much easier for me to make the decision to invest in something once than invest in something multiple times. So if I am going to a ceremony and then I need to also make a second decision to invest in somebody that's actually going to help me through the integration process, there's less of a chance that I'm going to do both. And maybe there's a place where we're including that in the practice and the process.
I mean, that's part of our business is actually supporting people in growth in different ways. And that is something to ask the facilitators, like what is their support, their aftercare, if you will. And some facilitators will not do it at all. And that's one approach. It's fine. And some include it. But there's a whole gamut in there. And whether you're using the facilitator for aftercare or you have a counselor or some sort of support system, the reality is you should have a plan and you should have things in place. And that's the place where we're looking in, because if you think about like a lot of facilitators, they may do this once a month, twice a month if they're very active in different cities. So now, containers can be 5 people, they can be 40 people. And just think how many people those facilitators come in. They can't do an integration plan for everyone for no cost. So there needs to be an agreement, either if you are continuing that integration with the facilitators, if it's available, or that you have a good plan in place for yourself afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think the last thing that I want to speak on is around the amount of medicine. And that's also something that will change for you as a facilitator, will change for you as a participant on what's needed and what's needed. For me, I can handle having a lot of medicine in my system generally, depending on what the medicine is, but generally speaking, I have a high capacity for it. And so for a long time, I thought that actually for a long time, just to be honest, in my experience, I thought that for me to be a good facilitator, I needed to have so much in me that I was almost like not aware so that I could just do what I do. And I am now realizing it's quite the opposite for me, is that I work well with just a little. And I've also had as a participant, some of the most expansive experiences I've had is actually on very little medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's going to vary for you based on where you are in your teachings and learnings and where you are as a practitioner. But I am realizing now that I had a lot of experiences where I think I might have been, I was in agreement, I said yes, right? But I also think I might have been overserved quite a bit. And again, it was all part of my teaching and learning, and there was really nothing bad or wrong with it. But as now I'm on the other side, I'm learning that that's a place that I like to play, is like, and the plants will tell you what the right amount is for that person. But yeah, I'm personally enjoying facilitating in a way where there's not, everybody's not
so
like
blasted out.
Yeah. And like, I'm enjoying as a facilitator what we can create and move and let happen in that space.
Mm-hmm.
Less about what's the right way to do it and more that like I'm having fucking blast in that space.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess that's it.
Mm-hmm.
We can sometimes get caught up in like thinking like the more is better, right?
Yeah.
And that's been a big part of my teaching in life, is like what actually is enough for me.
Right. Yeah. It's just part of the wisdom and the practice. And like you said, it's nice to be able to play in those areas, because just blasting someone out doesn't do anything. I mean, it can, but really people are coming together for an intention, and like that's a sacred honor to really help and support someone in that process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So do it with some care and love and kindness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Anything else?
No, I think there's my first public statement on plant medicine.
Going right in.
Go jumping in. Look what you've encouraged me to do.
All right. Well, if you have questions about plant medicine, or you have inquiries about how to get into it, or want to unwind anything about your experience, if you are considering becoming a facilitator, or you are facilitating, we're more than open to discussion around that. And we probably will be releasing some other programs in the future around lots of different areas of ceremony. And so, yeah, reach out. Feel free to message me with any questions you might have. I'm happy to address it here on the podcast, or if it's appropriate, I can reach out and talk to you personally. Thank you, Josh, so much for having this conversation with me today and joining me in life.
Yeah. My pleasure.
Yeah. And thank you for participating and joining us as well. And we'll see you next time.
Safe journeys.
Bye-bye.
Have you been hearing the call to expand your spiritual gifts and step into your next level of conscious leadership? If you're a coach, healer, or a spiritual leader, you can learn more about Shaman School and growing your spiritual business on our website, HoltonHealingArts.com, or send me a DM at Holton Healing Arts. Welcome to today's Member Query episode, where we explore questions about spiritual paths, intuitive gifts, growing a spiritual business, and shamanism. Do you have a question for us? Send us a DM at Holton Healing Arts. From one of our Leading with Spirit Facebook group members, the question is, how do I step into my full healer abilities? So what a lot of people do when they get started on this path is they look for the right words to use, or the right ritual, or the right process. What are the steps? What are the things I need to do? And you can throw all of that out the door. They can be helpful guides to get you started, but that's not how you step into your true healing power. The way you do that is by marrying your own personal spiritual knowledge, the things you've learned about or studied or explored in your lifetime, with your own personal experience, meaning the traumas you went through, the lessons you've learned, the personal experiences you've had, the personal thing that you're working on right now. Where those two things meet, your spiritual knowledge and your personal experience, that center point, that is your most potent medicine. That is where you step into your highest healer ability. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Leading with Spirit. If you did, please share the link for this episode with your biggest takeaway, tagging me at Holton Healing Arts. It would also support me if you subscribed and left a rating and review of the show so we can support more people living their highest purpose. Until next time, journey on.